Hi, friends, and welcome to NC Family's weekly update for the week ending December the 6th. I'm here with Sharon Sullivan from our government relations team. Hi, Sharon.
Hi.
It's great to have you here today. Well, Sharon, the North Carolina Senate was in session this week on Monday, and they took action on 4 bills, one of which was expected and 3 of which maybe not so much. The first bill was Senate Bill 382, which had been vetoed by Governor Roy Cooper. This was the third disaster relief measure passed by the General Assembly for Western North Carolina following Hurricane Helene, but it also included a number of other provisions, like moving the authority over the State Board of Elections from the governor's office to the new state auditor, and also requiring the Attorney General of North Carolina to represent the state, which you think that they probably would, but that has not always been the case.
Sure hasn't.
And more specifically, not only representing the state, but the will of the General Assembly when state laws are challenged legally. This has not always been the case, especially with our current Attorney General and incoming Governor, Josh Stein. Very different philosophies and approaches toward policy between the Republican-led General Assembly and the Democratic-led Attorney General's office. I really do think it's worth exploring this a little bit because this is a particularly interesting and important provision. And I want to read just a couple of lines from that part of this bill. It basically says the Attorney General shall not advance any argument that would result in the invalidation of any statute enacted by the General Assembly. It goes on to say when the General Assembly, through the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate, the leader of the Senate, participates in such action defending the state laws, the Attorney General is not authorized to take any position on behalf of the state of North Carolina that is contrary or inconsistent with the position of the General Assembly. And this is something that we've seen, especially during this last term of Josh Stein as Attorney General, is he would either choose not to defend state laws that he didn't agree with, or even, in some cases, be complicit with the parties that were challenging our statutes. And so this clarifies that the Attorney General's role is to actually defend the state and defend our state laws. So it's going to be interesting to see how this provision develops into the future, but it's a pretty decisive action by the General Assembly to align what many people believe and expect is the case, that the Attorney General is actually going to represent the state as he or she should. As expected, when the Senate discussed this bill and voted on it, they did override the governor's veto by a party line vote, but only after some theatrics that caused the Senate gallery to be cleared out. Sharon, we were there.
Right.
You were there.
Yep.
Tell us about what you experienced.
Yeah, well, we have seen this before when other controversial bills come up, and there was a group of people that had shown up and were up in the gallery. There was a significant police presence, general police presence, when we got upstairs, so we kind of had an indication that there might be some people that were not happy with the bill moving forward. And that is, in fact, what happened as soon as they were starting to talk about the bill and cast the votes. The people in the gallery got a little loud, and Mark Robinson, who was presiding over the Senate that day, did clear the entire gallery. So unfortunately, they did that bill first, and then we weren't able to be in the gallery to see the rest of it. But that happens sometimes.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate when people go down and with intentions of really protesting and loudly protesting, disrupting the chamber, and then causing everybody, including us, to have to clear out of the gallery and not be able to, to watch firsthand what's going on. But there were some people who definitely had strong opinions about this bill. But the Senate did override the governor's veto on that, and the House is scheduled to come back in next week and consider the same thing. So that will be interesting. 2 of the other bills that the Senate acted on call for constitutional amendments to North Carolina's Constitution, one that would limit the state's income tax rate to 5%. It's currently capped in the Constitution at 7%. And then another that would require voter ID not only for in-person voting, which is what the current Constitution speaks to and requires, but also for absentee voting. So if these two bills are approved by the House, in addition to the approval that we saw this week in the Senate, these constitutional amendments would appear on the general election ballot in November of 2026. So kind of interesting that the legislature went ahead, or the Senate went ahead and took action on these bills, sent them over to the House. And again, when the House comes into session next week, they're very likely to take these up as well. And then finally, the Senate voted in favor of a resolution that had been already passed by the State House, calling for a convention of the states or a constitutional convention to consider amending the United States Constitution to impose term limits, or the number of terms that members can serve in both the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. Proposals to amend the U.S. Constitution require either a 2/3 vote of Congress or a vote of 34 of the 50 state legislatures. And it seems, Sharon, that during discussion on this bill, the general consensus was that a constitutional convention is probably unlikely because of that high bar that 34 of the 50 states at least have to pursue and approve of such a convention. But it was also stated that if a significant number of states express an interest in imposing constitutional term limits for members of the U.S. House and U.S. Senate, then Congress may actually choose to do that. There are some members who impose term limits upon themselves when they run for office and say, I'll serve no more than 2 or 3 terms or whatever it may be. There are others who are in there for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what happens. Certainly, this is not a decision that is going to be made overnight, but there will continue to likely be ongoing efforts to try to call for a constitutional convention or a convention of the states. So Sharon, in other news, in addition to what happened in the legislature earlier in the week, the United States Supreme Court heard oral arguments in an important case out of Tennessee, which is challenging that state's law that's designed to protect children from the administration of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and body-mutilating gender transition surgeries. Tell us about this.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So it's United States versus Skrmetti. Skrmetti is the Attorney General of Tennessee who is standing up for his legislature and trying to make sure that the law that they've passed to protect their children from trans treatments, so-called trans treatments, would stay on the books. There's a doctor and 3 families from Tennessee. These families have transgender identifying children. They have brought the suit, and it has worked its way up to the Supreme Court. This case could have far-reaching implications. Like we in North Carolina passed House Bill 808, gender transition / minors. And that's our law that prevents minors from getting these kinds of treatments, so-called treatments. Yeah. And so if the court were to decide that it is unconstitutional based on the 14th Amendment, if they decided that they were going to overrule it because of the 14th Amendment, then that could throw all the states, I think there's about half of the states in the country that have these protections, they could all get thrown out. On the other hand, they could uphold the law and kind of like they did with the abortion laws, throw it back to the states and say, this is a state issue. It is not for 9 justices to decide up in D.C. So we are hoping and praying that they will uphold the law, and we ask that you would do the same so that we can maintain these protections for our kids.
Yes, and this is important because, as Sharon said, North Carolina did pass a very similar law in this current legislative biennium. And so we want to make sure that that is upheld.
Right.
So, yeah, a very, very important Skrmetti case.
Yeah.
So we will be providing more details and information about that as things develop. But the oral arguments were a very important part of this case and the effort to defend this law in Tennessee and laws that many other states have passed that are very similar.
And as to when we'll hear about it, whether we'll have an answer, it may not be until June. They have until June. So, we'd love to hear today, oh, yeah, we're throwing it back to the states. But it'll probably be a while.
Yes. Oftentimes it's, these issues that we are most interested in and concerned about are often some of the last opinions that the court issues during their term. So we'll see. Thank you for that explanation, Sharon.
Sure.
And last but not least, we are still waiting for a final determination to be made in an election for a seat on the North Carolina Supreme Court. After an initial recount, Democrat Allison Riggs is leading Republican Jefferson Griffin by just over 700 votes in a race where over 5.5 million votes were cast. Now, that's a margin of 1/100th of 1%. Now, Judge Griffin has filed legal action challenging a significant number of ballots that were cast in this race, and also calling for a statewide hand-to-eye recount. They've already done a preliminary recount. I believe they're in the process now of doing kind of a sample recount of a number of precincts within each county. And if that recount suggests that a statewide hand-to-eye recount, basically hand recounting every ballot, would be warranted because the result of the election could change, the state may well move forward with doing that. So all that said, we may not know the formal outcome of this race for several more weeks. So we will also be providing updates as things develop in this matter as well. So very important with respect to the makeup of our North Carolina Supreme Court. So Sharon, anything else on your mind?
Nope, just keep praying. We're still working hard for you, and we appreciate all that you do to support us.
Yes, and friends, we do. We're so grateful for your participation, your partnership, your support, and your prayers. It is the Christmas season, and we're excited about that, and are just so thankful for your continued partnership with us. And do want to just say, if you would, just continue to consider NC Family in your year-end giving, because we are fully supported. The work that we do is fully supported by just citizens across the state who believe in what we do and are committed to seeing biblical principles, biblical values advanced in North Carolina's political and public policy arena. And that's why we're here and what we do. So we're grateful for you. Thank you. And we will plan to see you next week. God bless.
Bye.